What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that a global diplomatic empire can be completely dismantled by a single quiet advisory from the British Foreign Office. In less than 24 hours, what was meticulously orchestrated to be her ultimate coronation on the American stage became the most suffocating international reprimand she has ever faced. The realization was immediate and freezing as she stepped out of her armored vehicle and walked into the grand gilded ballroom of a premier New York City hotel. She was dressed in her finest international daytime attire, fully expecting to be greeted by a carefully curated summit of American billionaires, powerful media tycoons, and geopolitical power brokers. She expected to walk into a room overflowing with the financial elite, all clamoring to bow to the Queen of the United Kingdom and eager to sign lucrative consulting deals with her family. Instead, the heavy mahogany doors opened to reveal a staggering, undeniable physical void. The grand ballroom was entirely empty. The crystal glasses were perfectly set, the security cordons were in place. But the titans of industry were completely absent. When she turned to her diplomatic liaison demanding an explanation, she was met with a freezing truth. The American elite had not been delayed by Manhattan traffic. They had systematically cancelled their appearances in unison after receiving a quiet, official notification that the Queen Consort was no longer operating with the sovereign backing of the British state. Despite the crown she left in London, Camilla was brutally reminded that her title carries absolutely no weight across the Atlantic without the explicit permission of the true bloodline. This video will unpack the secret diplomatic power grab the Queen Consort quietly attempted under the shadow of a routine foreign tour. How Prince William uncovered her staggering exploitation of the state's international prestige and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. You will see exactly how the rigid architecture of global diplomacy was weaponized to execute a flawless constitutional purge, leading to Camilla's devastating realization that her 30-year campaign to conquer the monarchy stopped at the exact borders of the United Kingdom. To understand the absolute devastation of this moment, we have to rebuild the staggering illusion of absolute power Camilla had constructed for herself. For 30 years, she played the longest, most patient, and most calculating game in modern royal history. She survived the intense public fury of the 1990s, methodically outlasted the hostility of the old aristocratic guard, and watched the total institutional erasure of Princess Diana's legacy within the palace walls. She slowly and carefully replaced the ghosts of the past with her own loyal courtiers, her own favoured press contacts, and her own private secretaries. By the time the crown was placed on her head at Westminster Abbey, the illusion was entirely complete. She believed she had King Charles completely controlled and that the institution had finally surrendered to her will. In her mind, she had successfully transformed from the realm's most hated mistress into the untouchable matriarch of a global empire. The magnificent royal residences felt like her personal properties, and the sovereign's international authority felt like her ultimate impenetrable shield. This is the profound danger of surviving a long, bitter war of attrition. You begin to mistake sheer endurance for absolute, boundless global authority. Camilla began to operate under the dangerous assumption that the entire diplomatic machinery of the British government, including embassies and foreign liaisons, was now permanently structured around her comfort, her post-reign survival, and her commands. She expected the blood royals to quietly step aside, assuming they were either too exhausted or too afraid of upsetting the king to challenge her quiet, administrative maneuvers abroad. She treated the historic prestige of the crown as a personal geopolitical favor bank, assuming she could freely distribute sovereign access to elevate her own status while securing a billionaire lifestyle for her non-royal children. The trigger for this current crisis began months ago, hidden far beneath the surface of the intense logistical preparations for a high-profile visit to the United States. Officially, the tour was framed as a routine charitable endeavor focused on literacy and global arts, but Camilla recognized a stark, uncomfortable reality. Her constitutional authority as Queen Consort vanishes overnight the moment her husband's reign ends, and with it goes her relevance on the world stage. Driven by a deep-seated commercial desperation and the terrifying prospect of being marginalized in the future, her office quietly initiated a highly sophisticated shadow itinerary known within diplomatic whisper networks as the Manhattan Directive. Behind the velvet ropes, Camilla's private office began systematically hijacking the official state schedule. Without consulting the Central Royal Secretariat, she organized a series of highly exclusive off-the-books meetings with notorious American billionaires, Wall Street executives, and the most powerful media tycoons in New York. This was a calculated, quiet attempt to use the geopolitical majesty of the British Crown to elevate her own bloodline into the global elite. She was attempting to broker private, highly lucrative alliances and consulting access for her son, permanently blurring the sacred line between sovereign diplomatic duty and her family's private commercial enterprise. Camilla expected absolute compliance from the government apparatus. She assumed that by framing these meetings as soft power cultural exchanges organized by the Queen Consort, the Foreign Office would quietly rubber stamp the security details and grant these tycoons the ultimate prize, the official endorsement of the British state. She believed she could quietly anchor her family's financial future into the wealth of the American billionaire class, establishing an untouchable international fortress before the crown passed to the next generation. If these meetings succeeded, it would signal to the entire global financial sector that Camilla's influence was absolute, and that her personal network was backed by the full geopolitical weight of the monarchy. But she profoundly underestimated Prince William and his ironclad control over the institution's global brand. This is where the story shifts from a tale of blind ambition to a forensic, cold-blooded international discovery. William is no longer just a grieving son or an heir waiting in the wings. As the Prince of Wales, he is the active legal regulator of the institution's global diplomatic future. He approaches the architecture of international relations with the cold, data-driven discipline of a modern statesman. Furthermore, William has spent his entire life watching the women he loves be consumed, marginalized or isolated by the treacherous machinations of the royal firm, and he has sworn a silent, ironclad oath that the true international prestige of the crown will never be auctioned off for private gain. When the internal audits of the proposed American itinerary and the unsanctioned diplomatic cables crossed the automated systems of the Central Intelligence Liaison, the paper trail immediately unraveled. William recognized the maneuver not as a harmless charitable networking event, but as a staggering exploitation of the sovereign's international currency. It was a direct attempt by an unelected non-blood royal to commercialize the state's diplomatic access. William did not scream. He did not confront Camilla in the grand hallways of Buckingham Palace before her departure. He did not leak angry tirades to the international press. The core blood royals operate with a devastatingly analytical and emotionally intelligent restraint. When William uncovered the subtle, coordinated push to infiltrate the American financial sector using the crown's name, he went straight to the master diplomatic architecture of the state. He realized that the greatest weakness of Camilla's empire is her absolute lack of independent sovereign authority on foreign soil. Every ounce of her power is borrowed. She possesses no inherent legal right to conduct geopolitical state business or grant sovereign endorsements to private citizens without the explicit approval of the government. Utilizing his absolute legal leverage and his deeply established connections within the British government, William engineered a brilliant, silent execution of revenge. He completely bypassed the King's office and the Queen Consort staff. William took Camilla's shadow itinerary directly to the highest levels of the Foreign Office. With a single silent administrative stroke, he enacted a strict diplomatic declassification. He legally and permanently downgraded Camilla's entire New York itinerary, reclassifying the trip from an official state visit to a strictly private non-state excursion. But the retaliation did not stop at a simple internal memo. To truly neutralize the illusion of her power and protect the integrity of the crown, William initiated a total forensic diplomatic blockade. He instructed the British ambassador and the consulate general to issue a quiet, highly confidential advisory to the offices of every single billionaire and media tycoon on Camilla's guest list. The advisory was polite but devastatingly clear. It informed the American elite that the Queen Consort's meetings were entirely personal, that they carried absolutely no state backing, no official royal endorsement, and that no diplomatic immunity or sovereign access would be granted to those who attended. Which brings us back to that freezing moment in the gilded New York ballroom. Camilla, confident that her global empire was secured and her son's financial future guaranteed, stood waiting for a summit of tycoons who would never arrive. As her liaison confirmed that her billionaire allies had cancelled the moment they realized she had been stripped of her diplomatic utility, the trap snapped completely shut. In front of her own stunned staff, Camilla realized that Prince William had just used the rigid, unfeeling machinery of international diplomacy to publicly amputate her commercial ambitions. The American elite are brutally pragmatic. They do not care about Camilla. They only care about proximity to the true power of the British state. The moment William turned off the geopolitical electricity, Camilla became entirely useless to them. Cornered, humiliated, and watching her manufactured international legacy evaporate in a foreign city. She realized that she was standing in an empty room thousands of miles from home, completely isolated by a stepson who controlled the true borders of her power. She turned away from the empty ballroom, reaching for her encrypted phone to demand that King Charles intervene, completely unaware that the most devastating silence of her life was waiting on the other end of the line. The heavy silence on the encrypted transatlantic telephone line was not merely the sound of an unanswered international call. It was the sound of a 30-year alliance permanently fracturing against the immovable wall of the British Foreign Office. Camilla retreated to her heavily guarded luxury suite overlooking Manhattan, her humiliation burning hot, and demanded an immediate audience with King Charles. She expected the man who had spent 3 decades bending the entire British establishment to accommodate her presence to finally stand up to his son. She demanded that he immediately summon the Prime Minister, reprimand the Foreign Secretary, and manually override the diplomatic blockade. She expected him to roar to her defense to formally reinstate her state visit status, and to force the American elite to return to the ballroom. But as she delivered her frantic ultimatum, the king simply looked down at the intelligence briefings provided by the Prince of Wales, his expression entirely unreadable, and offered a devastatingly quiet refusal. He did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of her entire royal existence. For years, Camilla had operated under the dangerous assumption that Charles would always prioritize her pride over the institution's rigorous demands. He had willingly fractured his relationship with his own mother and alienated his son simply to validate her presence. He had always been willing to burn the house down to keep her warm. But the king is a man deeply aware of his own mortality and the highly scrutinized nature of global diplomacy. Charles looked at the meticulous, ironclad diplomatic veto executed by his heir, and he recognized the harsh arithmetic of his position. To overturn William's directive would require the king to wage an open, highly public war against his own government, his intelligence agencies, and the Prince of Wales, all while on the world stage. It would mean formally admitting that the British Crown was willing to auction off its geopolitical prestige to American billionaires simply to soothe his wife's commercial insecurities. He realized that the international survival of the Crown, the stability of the government, and his own historical legacy were worth infinitely more than the private networking ambitions of his wife's family. In that freezing, unspoken moment, Charles chose the geopolitical integrity of the state over Camilla. That deafening silence echoing from London forced the Queen Consort to confront a freezing reality she had successfully ignored since the coronation. To fully comprehend the absolute devastation of this trap, one must unpack the staggering commercial desperation that dictates Camilla's entire existence behind the scenes. Why did she care so deeply about securing private meetings with foreign tycoons? Because behind the glittering public relations facade lies a stark, entirely dependent reality. Legally, structurally, and financially, the Queen Consort owns absolutely nothing within the royal infrastructure. She possesses no royal blood. She does not own the Duchy of Cornwall. She controls no sovereign wealth. Every privilege she enjoys, from the armoured vehicles she rides in to the diplomatic passports her staff carries, is entirely dependent on her husband's continued survival. Her secret Manhattan Directive was a frantic, desperate attempt to manufacture actual, untouchable commercial leverage that would survive the end of Charles's rule. She was trying to build a permanent, highly lucrative financial fortress for her non-royal children by selling proximity to the throne. She hoped to weave her family so deeply into the fabric of the global billionaire class that they could never be marginalized by the next reign. But Prince William's ruthless administrative retaliation exposed the sheer emptiness of her title. By officially downgrading her trip and warning off the financial elite, William did not just defeat her plan, he exposed her to the entire international community as a civilian attempting to siphon off the geopolitical prestige of the state for private gain. He legally amputated her from the true power center of the monarchy, leaving her stranded in a foreign city, holding a title that carries no weight when stripped of the kingdom's machinery. This is the cold forensic reality that William used to permanently box her in. William is no longer merely the heir to the throne, he is the active steward of the state's global survival. He views the monarchy not as a personal favor bank to be exploited by a spouse, but as a billion-dollar geopolitical corporation, that requires absolute structural integrity. He did not execute this retaliation out of petty domestic revenge. He did it because allowing an unelected non-blood royal to conduct unsanctioned state business with foreign tycoons is a direct threat to the security and dignity of the British state. He used the unfeeling machinery of international diplomacy to draw an ironclad boundary around his family, proving that while Camilla may wear the crown, she will never be permitted to auction off the prestige of the Windsor line to the highest bidder. This frantic, desperate overreach stands in devastating contrast to the quiet, undeniable ascension of Catherine, Princess of Wales. While Camilla desperately manipulates diplomatic channels and hustles for sovereign access in foreign hotel rooms to artificially elevate her bloodline, Catherine operates with the supreme confidence of absolute inevitability. The Princess of Wales does not need to broker backroom deals with media tycoons or beg American billionaires for relevance because she is the future of the state itself. Despite facing a brutal health crisis and enduring immense public pressure, Catherine has never demanded commercial concessions or attempted to hijack the sovereign's diplomatic duties for private gain. She rests securely in her role, embodying the exact uncomplaining sacrifice and institutional dignity that the crown demands. When Catherine steps onto the world stage, the global elite naturally gravitate toward her, not because they are looking for a lucrative consulting deal, but because they recognize her as the true legitimate continuation of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana's legacy. William has ensured that the protective dome over the true bloodline is completely impenetrable, leaving the frantic maneuvering of the Queen Consort entirely suffocated by protocol. The subtle shifts occurring within the global diplomatic corridors are now impossible to ignore. In the aristocratic world, a downgraded state visit and a permanently revoked itinerary are never mere logistical accidents. They are broadcasted messages regarding the massive transfer of true power, the foreign ambassadors, the State Department liaisons, and the palace staff who once rushed to accommodate Camilla's every preference are now actively reading the room. They see the British consulates actively enforcing Prince William's blockade right in front of the Queen Consort's face. The diplomatic corps is looking past the current fading reign and quietly, permanently aligning their absolute loyalties with the Prince of Wales. The execution of this diplomatic purge was in reality a structural rehearsal for Camilla's eventual obsolescence. The system allowed her to wear the spectacular historic jewels and travel on a state-funded aircraft. But the moment she attempted to touch the actual geopolitical machinery of the state, she was completely isolated. Camilla successfully won the long, bitter war of attrition to become queen. She outlasted public outrage and historical resistance, but the victory is entirely hollow. She is surrounded by the sparkling trappings of ultimate majesty, yet she controls absolutely none of the heavy machinery. She managed to secure the title, but she has definitively permanently lost the kingdom. Prince William used the cold, unforgiving administrative protocol of the royal institution to protect the state from a woman who wanted to use the crown for her own commercial ego. When the reign eventually changes, Camilla's title will largely disappear into the archives. She will become a dowager, left occupying a position that grows heavier by the day. She will be sitting in magnificent rooms she does not own, holding a title that carries absolutely no financial or geopolitical weight, waiting for international invitations and billionaire summits that will never arrive. The grand illusion has finally dissolved, leaving behind the freezing reality of institutional survival, and the house always wins. If you found this deep dive into the hidden geopolitical power dynamics of the royal institution insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know how you feel about Prince William stepping up to protect the diplomatic integrity of the crown on the world stage. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.